Hello, it's Mrs. McCullough, and we are continuing on with this series about how readers track characters. So far, what we've learned is how we will track characters across a whole text, and we'll do that by noting all the details of this one facet. We'll notice what the characters do, what the characters say, and what the characters think. And then when we start to think about all of those actions and thoughts and words that the character will use, then we start to determine the character's personality. How are they the same in the beginning and the middle and the end? And that's called the character trait. Then in the last lesson, what we did was we focused a little bit more on how the character changes and also why the character changes. And so we paid really close attention to how he was in the beginning and how he was at the end, but also what did he learn? That's a really important thing to pay attention to because that's going to help us with the next part. The next part of what we're going to talk about is this idea of central message or a lesson. Now, let me tell you about this a little bit. So the author of the text will tell us a lot about the characters, and we'll notice how the characters change and maybe what lesson the characters learned. But the reason why they do this is so that they can actually share with us as human beings lessons that we can learn. Lessons on how to be a better person, how to treat others in a nicer way, how to just really persevere and move through this world together as human beings. And so rather than just coming out and telling us, you should behave in this way, authors do this by telling us stories about characters who actually learn lessons. And so what we're going to do is we are going to look at how characters changed and why they changed. And that's going to help us determine what's the central message of this story. What's the lesson? Or maybe you've heard somebody call it theme. Especially if you're a third grader. You might have heard your teacher call this a theme. Let's determine the theme of a passage. Well, let me tell you in on a secret. That word theme, see how it looks like the here and me here? That's because theme is really all about the message the author teaches me. So while it might be a character that learned a lesson, how can I, as a human being, learn this lesson? I have to pay attention to the theme. See that? Oh my goodness. And notice how it's pink. So guys, how do you figure out the theme? By doing all of the things that we did here. Collecting the green reading voice details, the details in the text. Thinking through things with our thinking voice. And having the bigger inference. You see, these thoughts of determining the trait or how they change or the theme, that's the inference. It's not literally stated in the text, but the author is trying to send me the message. What's the lesson I could learn from this character? Okay, now that's a bunch of, mumbo jumbo kind of teacher talk. I know it is. I'm going to put theme down here and add it to it, okay? But how does somebody actually do this? We've already done a lot of the work. You see, when we go back in and we actually look at some of these pieces on why the character changed and how the character changed, then that'll really help us determine what the theme is. What is the message I can learn as a person? So let's go back to A Bad Case of Stripes, okay? I know we've done a lot with this book already, but in A Bad Case of Stripes, let's look at Camilla. Remember in the beginning that Camilla believes it's best to give up what she loved. Remember the lima beans? In hopes that all the kids would like her. And Camilla believes it's really best at the end to go ahead and eat lima beans and not care about what other kids think. See how she really changed? So she was going to give up lima beans so kids would like her. Now she's going to eat the lima beans and she doesn't care what kids think. Okay, so what caused that change? What did the character learn? Well, Camilla had changed so much that she couldn't even recognize herself. She had to tell the truth. That's what was really causing this change. Okay, so how's that going to help me figure out the theme? All right. So when we're doing theme, here's the secret. You can't bring up the character's name. You can't bring up the setting. And you really can't bring up the main problem, like the beans and the changing and all that. But you have to kind of look at it as a more global lesson. So what could we, as human beings, what could we learn from Camilla? Camilla gave up lima beans to make people like her in the beginning. Then she realized it was best if she just ate lima beans like she likes and not care about what the other kids think. So how should people behave? What could we learn from that lesson? Well, people should, let's see, just be themselves, right? People should just be themselves and not worry about what other people think. Hear how I did that without saying Camilla's name, without using lima beans, without talking about how she was changing with the bad case of stripes. Hear how I did that? So people should, okay? Or someone could not worry about what other people think and they will be happy. See how I did that? I'm talking more about a global, like human beings or kids or people. That's what I'm doing. So when I'm thinking about this, I'm starting to try to pay attention to what the author believes. What message is the author trying to send to us by learning about this story that somebody else went through? So when I'm thinking about it from that end, I'm always trying to think about how could I put this maybe into one sentence where I'm thinking more globally about the people and what they could do. And so here's what I was thinking. Decide who you are and don't worry about what other people think. Yeah, is that the lesson that Camilla learned? Yeah, decide who you are. She's somebody who likes lima beans. And then don't worry about what the other kids think. Remember, she was fretting about how they would like her. So I took her lesson that she learned and I wrote it in a sentence. That's an example of a theme of a story. And now we know that we're just going to be who we are and not worry about what other people think. You could say it in a couple different ways. As a matter of fact, I've already done that a little bit in this lesson. What about this? Be yourself and you'll be happy, right? We're talking just to everybody out there, just human beings, kids, adults, anybody. They can learn that lesson from Camilla. Okay, so now I want us to try it. And I want to try it with a story that we've already done a lot of work on because you've got to go through all these steps before you can get to theme. So let's go back to this idea of Frog and Toad. Frog and Toad are friends, and we were looking at just the chapter, A Lost Button. And so let's go back and let's look at some of the work that we've been doing to try to figure out how was Toad in the beginning, how was Toad at the end, and what caused him to change, remember? Okay, so let's look at this. So how was he in the beginning? Well, Toad thinks it's a big problem that he lost his button. Remember, he's all upset. Let's go back into the text. Now, not only do my feet hurt, but I have lost one of my buttons on my jacket. He even says, oh, drat, right? He's all upset about it. But at the end, he feels totally different. Toad believes that his friend is more important than his jacket or buttons. And how do we know that? Because at the very end of this chapter, then He had worked on his jacket. He sewed all those buttons onto his jacket, all the buttons that he found. He sewed them on. And then what did he do? He didn't keep it for himself. He gave it to Frog. Okay, so what caused the change? What made Toad feel completely different and not worry about the buttons anymore? Well, because in that tipping point, in kind of the big climax of the story, remember, he got angry and he screamed at Frog when he couldn't find his buttons. Remember, he was throwing like a temper tantrum almost. And so let's go back in here to the text. Look at it. Look, Frog's over here by himself and Toad is having a temper tantrum. He jumped up and down and screamed, "The whole world is covered with buttons and not one of them is mine." Yeah, that was an intense moment. Then he ran home and slammed the door, and there on the floor he saw his white 4-holed big round thick button. Uh-oh. He'd gotten so angry, and there it was the whole time. And then he says something here. "Oh," said Toad, "it was here all the time. What a lot of trouble I've made for Frog." That's the tipping point. That's when he realized he'd made a lot of trouble for his friend Frog. And that's what really made him change. And so what lesson did Frog learn? In the beginning, he was all worried about the buttons. It was the worst thing in the world. He got so angry, he screamed at his friend. And then when he got home, he found it. And he realized he hadn't been a very good friend. And so then he takes his buttons and his jacket, and at the end, he gives it to Frog. So what lesson did he learn? That Frog is a pretty good friend? Maybe something like that. But then what could we learn as human beings? What could we learn from Toad's work here? People should not be angry about things. People should treat their friends better, right? Maybe something like that. People should treat others the way they want to be treated. I bet you've heard that one before, right? That's a really good lesson. That could be the message that the author teaches me. So I want you to think about what could be a lesson. How could we put it into our own words? What lesson could we learn from Toad, going from being mad about things to giving his friend a present to kind of say, "I'm sorry"? So what about if you make a mistake, then you should do what? Tell your friend you're sorry? Something like that, okay? And I'm saying if you make a mistake, but you could also say if people make mistakes, they should tell their friends they're sorry. You could change it around, but I'm kind of just saying you as all of us on the planet, all of us as people, as kids, as second graders, as third graders, as adults, if you make a mistake, you should tell your friends you're sorry. Okay? And that's what he was doing, wasn't it? When he took all those buttons he found and he gave them to Frog on his jacket. And the other thing that maybe people will learn is that people are more important than possessions. And possessions, that's a really fancy word for stuff, right? He was all worried about stuff. Instead, he wasn't thinking about how he was treating his friend. And people are more important than possessions. That would be an example of a theme that the author is teaching me and you and all of us. Okay? So, if you were in Mrs. McCullough's class, here's what I'd have you do next. I would have you go back to this passage that we've been reading, and we've been learning all about Humpty Dumpty and what happened to him after the fall. And you've already done a ton of the work because we've collected the details. We've thought about it. We decided what his personality would be. Remember, we thought he was kind of sentimental because he was fond of things how they used to be. And then we've already done the work on how he changed. So let me show it to you. It's here on the computer. It's going to be available on the links underneath this video so that you can go back to this. And remember, Humpty was too afraid to be up on the wall with the birds in the beginning of the story. But at the end, he went where he wanted, even though he was terrified. Okay, so what did he learn? What caused that change? Remember, it was when he lost his plane up on the wall and he remembered how happy he was. And he knew he had to face his fear to be happy. So what can we, as people, learn from Humpty Dumpty, who went up on that wall even though he was afraid because he wanted to be up there with the birds? Now, when we make these statements, we can't say Humpty Dumpty's name. We can't say anything about the wall or the birds. We just have to talk about what lesson, what message is the author trying to teach us? What could we learn based on what happened to Humpty? And I want you to see if you could write it in a sentence, just a sentence. And I want you to think about it. And I want you to think, could you say it in a different way? Because here's the thing about theme. There's not one right answer. No, there's not one right answer. As long as you can back it up with all the details you collected from the text, it counts. So let's just play around with it. See if you could do one sentence and then possibly a second sentence. You want to do a third sentence? Go for it. Because you need practice in writing the theme as a sentence. Okay? That's what you would do if you were in Mrs. McCullough's class. You're going to go back to the paper I have for you on Humpty Dumpty After the Fall and see if you can write the theme in one sentence. That's what you would do if you were in my class, but your teacher might have an even better idea.